welcome to episode 73 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel we have Kevin Old.
Hello.
And our special guest today is Michael Gilmore. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Yeah, pleasure to be on the show. Thanks.
Yeah, great to have you. I've known you through social media for quite some time, so it's cool to finally get to talk to you.
Yeah, pleasure on my side as well. I've definitely been following you. You've been a big help helping keep us on the rails.
Good, awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So before we kind of get into the topic, what we're going to be really going over in this episode, we're going to be talking about kind of the different options that are on the table right now in the mobile development space, be it a hybrid app, be it React Native, be it native. We've kind of glossed over this stuff a few times in some past episodes, but here I think we're going to kind of focus on it. Michael works with an agency where they get customers that have these types of decisions that need to be made. I think Kevin's working in a company right now where they're kind of having internal discussions about what works for their current use case. And I've certainly had times where I'm working with clients where React Native was definitely the best option, and then other times where it's just not the best option. We're going to kind of talk about what those different situations are. So before we kind of get into that, though, Michael, do you mind giving us an introduction about yourself, how you got into programming, and kind of what you're doing right now?
Sure. So back in the early 90s, my friend had an Apple computer, and this is in Mississippi. We lived near the Kiln in Mississippi, if you're familiar with that. And there's a NASA like test station there, and his father had this gigantic Mac computer. He had retrofitted like a giant CRT, and I saw this game Prince of Persia all in monochrome, and I was just fascinated by it because this was the first time I got exposed to a computer. And so, I think from that moment on, I was in love. And then we, in our school, were lucky enough to have a few Mac computers that had the Oregon Trail on it in Carmen, San Diego. So we played that just in the terminal. That was kind of fun.
Oh yeah, I love Carmen, San Diego. I remember that game.
It's so addictive. Like, if you've ever played it, and when it became like in color, it was like that much better because you didn't have to switch floppies as much, and there's all this memory. So that was really fun. I felt like that got me into it, and games in general. And then I think with the evolution of like the PC, where you had the 486 and then got into Intel and all that, that's when I think computers really stood out. And the biggest thing that I spent most of my time doing was actually on Olga. If you guys remember that, the online guitar archive, looking for tablature.
No, I don't believe I do.
Yeah, it's basically Netscape had a lot of popularity, and so they had this online guitar archive, and me and my buddy did everything we could to just pilfer that guy because we wanted to play every song. We had a band in our hometown. It was really cool. So we did everything we could to get those files so we could have all the transcribed sheet music, because they had this guitar magazine and it cost a lot of money, and we didn't have a lot of money. So we had to figure out ways to like get this sheet music from a borrowed source. And so we use that quite a bit. I think there's still like an archive online for it, but that's again another thing. Then I went into college, and one of my first courses was actually in Java, and I had this Deedle and Deedle, I think it was 4th edition book, and we learned how to make applets, and it was hardcore SDLC. Like, we had to diagram everything, and we spent a lot of time, and we wrote a lot of code, but it was only towards the end that we actually saw like a single application come together, and that took like a whole semester. So that was pretty much my big thing into like getting into programming when I was in a major university. And then sort of following that, I tried to figure out what was going to make the most sense for work. And at that time, I think this is early 2000s, I was doing VB, and I'd learned something called FoxPro, which never learned FoxPro. It was a bad thing. It was totally not supported by Microsoft anymore. I took a gig where we were doing FoxPro, and they had another team that was on SQL, and they wound up just switching over to that and just letting us all kind of go in a nice way. And so I kind of knew this not so useful thing in the field, and it was really hard to get work in VB. So I just decided to further explore and got out of, at this time I was in Alabama. So I made my way to California and then tried to get a gig here. And I spent time in actual engineering sector for a while. But then finally I want to say about 8 or 9 years ago, I made my way into a startup where we primarily focused on games and some mobile. And I did it as a project manager. So they let me come in and, I was a project manager, and I gave them no inclination that I had any experience at all with writing code. At that time, I think we were doing some stuff with Flash, with ActionScript, and we were trying to do pretty much everything we could. And something happened where we shifted from the Flash to Unity 3D, and we were all pretty blown away. We all team had to, learn C#, which some of them were already using Unreal, but Unity had a big promise. And so we had actually at that time had some ideas about, well, what if we could build a cross-platform app in Unity? At that time, the UI system was very difficult to work with. It was like way better to just write natively. And so we experimented with it, but we stuck to native, and then we built most of our cross-platform games themselves, especially the 3D ones. Those were all done pretty much in Unity 3D, and I think we made Facebook versions of them for the web, and of course iOS and Android. And that connection at that agency is what eventually moved me into working for the agency I work for now, which is Metal Mobile. They're a very interesting company because they've had great timing. They went hardcore native development for iOS primarily, like right after the first iPhone came out. And I'd say about 6 years of that business, they had some amazing ideas. Like they had this one idea that was, it was the submit your app idea, and you could just submit your app, and they would build it if they liked it, for like an agreement between people. It was a good idea and a bad idea at the same time, because I wasn't there for it, but the people that told me the stories about it were that it was like the phone ringing off the hook. They had so many submissions and people just calling and like, hey, where are you at with this? And, and they still had to be a for-hire company and just put out work. So yeah, it was pretty gnarly. But so I walked into a shop where they had a lot of really hardcore talent. They were experts in mobile, and we spent, I'd say, up until about 2.5 years ago, just doing everything in mobile. And then our stack primarily was Java with either Mongo or some SQL.
So you mentioned you were from Mississippi, which is really cool because you're the first person that's been on our show that's from Mississippi other than myself. So that's really interesting. I'd like to know, do you still like go back and visit Mississippi, and how did you end up in LA? Is that where you are, in Orange County?
Yeah, I'm in Orange County. I moved, so I was born in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I met a gal out there, and I did my thing, and she was actually born in California, and she was the youngest of all her siblings. So, she had done what any good better half had done, and she had said, you're stupid and you need to get a better job, right? And so we were like, well, we'll just come out to California where your older siblings are, and we'll give this a run. So we came out here, and I just sort of chased the dream, as I would call it, and made my way around. Interestingly enough, just as I was getting out of there and had took off, a month later, Katrina made landfall.
Wow, and you were in Biloxi, so you would have been right there.
Oh, right in the eye. Wow. My father lives in Bay St. Louis, and he's right across the water from the New Orleans area. So if you there's a huge lake there that sort of separates the Louisiana, Mississippi. They have Slidell or whatever, but he lived right on very close to the Delta in Mississippi, and he was in his attic.
Yeah, that was like one of the worst hit areas.
Oh, it was terrible. So Yeah, so I made sure everybody was okay, and it was like I said, it was definitely weird because you know the media played up all of that stuff so much that it was just like what? So you just have to you don't even it's unexplainable for me because I didn't even get most of the issues and I got really upset and I wanted to go back home and help people and flights were canceled and all this sort of stuff. But it's just like anything. People there are real tough. I mean, you already know that. And they move on. They soldier on. So that's I'm proud that I'm from a place like that because people there are tough. And you come out here to an area like this and people move fast and all that, but there's definitely a little more grit to us. We get down and dirty, and it's cool. And like I said, I will be going back home on the 18th. I'm going to take my I'm going to take my fiance and her other family members. So there's a total of 9 of us, and we're all going back to Mississippi to visit.
Nice, nice. They're gonna be in for culture shock.
Yeah, but they're from Laos, so it's funny that I've been in Southeast Asia a lot, and people from Southeast Asia kind of have the similarity. They have hot, humid weather. There's a lot of agriculture, and they're just real scrappy people. They just figure stuff out, and the food is not too dissimilar as well. They eat a lot of spicy seafood, so you can imagine the demand for crawfish. They're just crazy about it. Yeah,
That's hilarious.
I know.
So tell us about the company that you're with right now and kind of what you do there right now, I guess.
So I'm with a company called Metal Mobile, and what we do is if you're a entrepreneur or you're a big company, it doesn't we take them in all shapes and sizes. And really what we're doing is, if you have an idea where you want you have this idea for an app and maybe you want to validate it with an MVP, or you've got this existing stack and it needs refactoring, or you're just wanting to build a secondary service from it because you've learned, or let's just say you just want a straight up market release app, right? We do that. We also build custom backends. We have some EE experience. So like if you wanted like a custom PCB board with some custom firmware, we do actually go down to that level. So it seems like we do a lot of everything, but I say our core specialty is definitely in just, kicking out mobile apps, and it's all under one roof, which is really nice. Like we've got designers, we have architects, so people that lay out storyboards and wireframes. We have a really good planning team. We have really good project managers who do a lot of communication, and then more than 50% of the team is just engineers. I'd say 50% of them are full stack, and the other ones are getting there very, very quickly.
So you focus your specialty is mobile apps at that company. Like how many people are working there? Like right now, I guess.
I'd say we're somewhere close to 25. I can't, remember the exact number, but 25 is a pretty good estimate.
Okay, so yeah, so it's like a fairly small like boutique size company, maybe.
Mm-hmm. But we do a lot, man. We do. We get hired in for like heavy lifting projects from companies where they might have 500 engineers. It's just that they're so busy with their ongoing workload that someone in another division just wants the speed and flexibility of a team our size. So we'll just come in and just kill it.
So how does React Native fit in with what you've been doing at that company, and kind of what's the story of React Native there?
Sure. So about 2.5 years ago, there was I was working on trying to find a way of like prototyping things faster, so that I thought, people that used InVision, And those tools, they're really helpful because you can iterate really, really quickly. But I really wanted to have something where I could, lay out something that could be used in the actual code base. Like, it didn't make sense to kind of repeat yourself, right? Like, it just didn't. So Ray, I don't want to mispronounce his last name, but his name's Ray Winderlich, I believe. And he's got a blog online, and he did this introduction to React Native where it was like a house finding app in the UK. And so I pulled the code, and I had, pulled it down, and I'd read his tutorial from like beginning to end, and it wasn't very, like, I thought it was going to be, a lot more challenging, but I went through it, and I mean, in no time at all, I was up and running, and I had this app that was, able to search properties, and it didn't really have like, any complexities, and it was all using like a single endpoint on an API side. So, and it was using fetch, which was great. So, within the same week, a potential customer had walked in, and they wanted something that had a very similar behavior. It was for like finding senior citizens' homes, like selecting the right one. So instead of a house search, it was like senior citizen homes for your parents. And they had this, pretty interesting back end, front end on WordPress. And so I had said, we could retrofit this and then just send this over to them as a way of saying, we want to do business with you. Why don't you try out this demo and search your own data with it? So my boss was like, sure, let's give it a try. And he's always been cool like that. Like, I work at one of the best places because we can experiment. We still get the work done, but we can definitely experiment in things that may seem a little unorthodox to others. So I went out, we built it, we sent it over to the guy. He got super excited. Interestingly enough, he didn't elect to go forward with us, for all the common reasons that sometimes you can't move forward. This one, I think, was budgetary, but it was an interesting thing because, I mean, it was like literally overnight, and we had something that would resemble a very simple experience, proving out that we could search his back end and display that in a list view and be able to select it and see some details. So it was great. We always kept our eye on it, but there really wasn't a need for it because people were very much into wanting to have native experiences, native apps. And there were still some shortcomings at the time, particularly around like the hardware APIs, navigation, which is sort of an ongoing thing, but not really. I mean, it's just, there's ways of working with it, and that's the beauty. You have all these options now. But I think what had happened is there was a project that the CTO of the company was the person who kept my head on straight for a while there. And, wanting to be experimental, he came from really hardcore, low level assembly, do everything, the good old fashioned handcrafted way. And there's really nothing wrong with it. It's just we just had to evolve a little bit. So we had this project come in, and the customer wanted some WebRTC experience in a cross-platform app. And this was, I think, last year, maybe a little more than a year ago. But they wanted this cross-platform experience where they were using like WebRTC because they wanted to have that parallel video communication, like in Skype and all those other things. And they wanted it on mobile. And, I'd said we should give this a try. So what he told me was that if you could build out an experience on the device that played back an HLS stream and, show me that it performs, then I'll consider it. So over the weekend, I found Oney had a WebRTC node module and built that out, and then just had two phones call each other. And I brought it in the office on Monday and showed it to him, and he was like, "Wait, you did this over the weekend?" So he kind of looked at it and said, this might not be so bad. So that was kind of our like dive into as a team. Well, now, once you get vetted by the CTO, right, you got the blessing, so you can move forward. And this is all coming from like someone who's more on the PM side. So, I'm definitely not someone that's stepping on anyone's toes, but just showing them that there's other tools to solve the problem that could be more beneficial. So from there, we still built out other projects like particularly Unity 3D. But then we built out another project. We're using TVML, which was nice because we were using the JavaScript APIs for TVML on the Apple TV. I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but you can just write a very simply structured app using Apple's TVML and TVJS language, and you can put all that like on a web page, and the TV just needs like a single app delegate that will go and fetch that data from that server, and it just kind of does a handoff and takes over that data. So you can have very, very much a predefined template. So you can have like all of the looks and views of Apple TV, like running all from like essentially a web page. Even though Apple does say it's not a web browser, sure, but they give you a lot of this code so you can have these very solid experiences. So we just kind of used that, did some fun stuff with that. And then I think our next big, these are all client projects that actually have been published and are out in the field, which is cool. Like have a production app that's, continually being supported all in React Native. So we have one right now that is, it's extremely comprehensive and even supports Fire OS. It's a video messaging style app. And, once it comes out and it's public, I can certainly direct you to it if you want to check it out. But that one's great because we built a custom stack where we have Node, Mongo. Actually, that's Node and Postgres of all things. So it's Node and Postgres. And then we use SQLize on Node. And then on the mobile app side, we use Amazon's, I think it's the SNS SDK. So that's how we configure all of our pushes now, though. And they just recently put out an update for that, which was really nice. And the whole app is pretty much just all Amazon hosted, and then iOS, iPhone, iPad, a multitude of Android in which React Native supports, and then of course Fire OS. So we have it working on Kindles, and the Kindle was definitely an interesting thing because it's Android, but not really. There's some gotchas, but we learned that pretty quick, and that app will be shipping within the month, and it'll be public. But that one's been fun.
It's super interesting that you mentioned the Ray Wenderlich tutorial, because I think that too was one of the first times I actually used React Native, and he put that out so quickly and so early. It was just I think it was like the only resource at the time, but it was really well done, and it actually speaks a lot to how much people when they write content and blog posts, how influential they can be. And I'm curious how many other people maybe kind of got their first look at React Native, and kind of how that may have helped the community kind of get going, having such a really well done tutorial at that early stage in time that actually worked. So I guess one thing I'm interested in before, so you all picked up some projects in React Native, and that's been fairly recently, I guess, in the last couple of years. What were you all using before you started using React Native?
So when the shop first opened, like I said, it was just Objective-C, iOS only, and then Android really started to be a big deal. Like it was clear that Android wasn't going anywhere, and so we moved into that, and we were pretty much building self-hosted apps. So things with the content stored locally, not much external communications, no backend stacks. It was pretty tight. We did apps for like a whole multitude of people, but then the company sort of went into Ruby mode. So we did Ruby on Rails, and we built out some very interesting things. We had built out an app recommendation system. So it was an app that was basically, at the time, it was observing the local iOS device and trying to figure out what other apps were installed before they switched over to the UUIDs. And so we were using that to kind of figure out what was on your phone and make recommendations based on that. So we sort of had our own like App Store recommendations app that was powered by what's on your app, what's on your friends' phones. And we used Ruby quite a bit, in addition to using like PHP to kind of serve as a quasi backend. And we use that for pretty much serving media content. So like we have an app that even today runs fantastic, and we do keep it up, but we don't have to do much. But it was built originally in Objective-C, and it just it pretty much downloads zip files from S3 when in-app purchases are authorized, and it uses a little bit of the IM configuration, so you can't be too naughty. But it's from Marley Matlin, and it's all about teaching sign language, purely native, and it's got different experiences for our iPad and iOS, just slightly tuned, to present a solid experience. We've done some apps for Cheech and Chong. We've had an interesting history, and then at that time, we decided to work on a sort of an internal project that wound up being one of the first live streaming video applications. It was called Hang With. It's just recently kind of been slowed down and shut down, but it was a great proof of that we could go out and we could build something really advanced. And interestingly enough, it's on the same technology stack that like just before we took it down, it was on the same technology stack as Facebook Live and Periscope and all those guys. Like we were maybe 3 to 2.5 years ahead of them with this technology. It was an entire social network just on video streaming. We had chatting with each other. You could tip people. And it was a lot of stuff going on. Backend was built in Java, and those were purely native. And we had a PHP based website. So again, we just built this crazy stack that was it was real powerful. And then again, more majority of like a Ruby backend services, web admin pages, and then some PHP. And that was pretty much our primary thing. Along the way, we just had people that saw what we were doing. And so we got a lot of our customers by word of mouth. So being in the App Store, and they would just come to us and they'd be like, hey, like here's the good old story, right? Like, hey, I hired this team. Not that I'm actually impartial to the overseas thing. Like, I don't think it's really about the location of the developer. It's just knowing that you've got people who understand, use your best judgment and have the expertise and aren't like experimenting where they don't understand like solid engineering principles, where you can't be delivering buggy builds and you can't just do things incorrectly and not refactor and not check your code. Like QA is a big deal. And so, and I think that's another, big advantage of React Native. But we had taken on people who had projects where they had said, like this developer overseas built my app and, I'm in trouble. And we would take those on. And that wound up being a big part of even today, I'd say a big part of our business is in, project recovery, or at least kind of reimagining their experience in Apple terms. Right. So, yeah.
So tell me about the conversation when you have a customer come to you and they've heard about React Native and they want to use that, but their app may not fit. What are the options you guys explore?
So the first thing we do is we just try to identify an initial feature set, sort of like planning without going into contract, if you will. We always try to just dig in. Like, it's not about like, depending on the complexity, we may go into something that we term as pre-development, where we will do like a full planning phase where we ask a lot of questions, hit a whiteboard. We build out these really comprehensive architected documents that are, we have a plotter in the office. So what we do is we take a bunch of wireframes and literally put them together in a very organized, like mind map model, if you will, where it has all the notations of what the screen's responsible for. It's almost like in React Native where, some people advise you to do like component architecture. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just a little bit more on like human terms so that it's not too technical, and it gives them a great peek into what's going on. when we do that, we kind of make the determination at that point if a hybrid app makes sense for them, particularly if they're trying to go after a big audience and there's nothing too specialized. Like if you have an app that is primarily going to be users sign up, users pass messages back and forth, users upload pictures, and they have a conversation and there's nothing overly complicated about it, that's a perfect candidate for a hybrid app, right? Along with, we actually pair typically our React Native apps. It makes perfect sense to use React.js for the, for the web admin side of things if we need to. And that's mainly because our utils class is like the first thing to be shared. I mean, Natter did this great thing on primitives, which is looking real promising because maybe we can share some of that too. But that may be the stack to go with. If you come to us and you have something that's like, we had this client that came to us and they have a specialized armband for fitness, and it has an internal clock, and it needs to have Bluetooth connectivity, and it has to be super responsive to that reconnect because you can go out of the Bluetooth range and come back in, and you need to be able to snatch the timestamps off the device at various moments in addition to like the camera. All of that is sort of doable in React Native, but we really wanted it to be performant because this is intended to be for, athletes who are very physically strong. They move really quickly. Everything about the app had to be very responsive, particularly on hardware communications. And we had to be really in control of that. So in that case, that was a recommendation where we made it, you were going to build it in Objective-C, and we had to use some low-level C for hardware communications, and that's mainly because they have a very specialized piece of hardware. Yeah, and that was one where we had to make that recommendation.
So are your developers at your company, I guess, are they pretty versed in all of these technologies, or do you have like iOS developers and Android developers and JavaScript developers? Like, does your company kind of need to pick up new people when you get these projects that may be out of the normal kind of scope of what you're doing, or kind of how does that work?
Oddly enough, Karma has just been really good to us. So like I said, I've been in the Orange County area for a while, and I've worked with guys who they've just been super, super involved in tech, and their range of abilities is just off the charts. I mean, we really are blessed. And so it used to be, I'd say when I first started, there was this clear line of separation where we had the iOS developers on one side of the room and the Android guys on the other side of the room, and they were both bad-mouthing each other's phones because the Android guys had their Android phones, the iOS guys had their iOS phones, and they both bashed each other languages. They were like, look at this, the layout system in iOS with the storyboards and the constraints. We can just use our XML layouts, and we don't have to fight with all that stuff. And it was a lot of camaraderie, and then it sort of made this convergence. I'm again, not to boast too much on the React Native thing, but React Native has done one thing that I've always wanted to see, and that is everybody in the office know a single language and be able to all work on the same project, at least if it's just adjusting a button. Because before that, you would have this Android guy, right? And all the iOS guys would be booked, and an iOS project would come in, and this Android guy, he doesn't necessarily have any work, so he's got to learn Objective-C. I mean, what do you do in that situation, right? So managing the resources was kind of challenging. But like I said, now I would say that because so many people have had to move into the React Native thing, and they've done that with ease, that it's sort of been inspiring to just say, you know what, we can just learn all kinds of stuff. So we had a guy who was hardcore Objective-C. He picked up Swift. Then he jumped into using functional programming in JavaScript, built out a backend in Node. And, he's well versed on all those things. It's just the code just is somehow just all translated to him. We have another guy, hardcore C# guy, only in Unity 3D. We brought him in the React Native. Then he went and learned Objective-C, which is like a really odd circle. And, he's killing it on Objective-C, and he's doing some stuff in Node. I'd say oddly enough, there are a lot of guys where they're all really great. And a lot of that comes from, I want to say, some main guys in our office. So we have this guy named Hugo, and Hugo is that video I shared with you on the React Native Wowza Go Coder wrapper. He was the guy that was like, we should make a wrapper out of this because we use it so much. We were doing a lot of live video for people and having to use Wowza. So what we did is he was like, let's just make a native module out of this. That way, that's the only thing that's really intensive and we need to have a little more control over from the native aspect and be able to utilize these SDKs versus like trying to reinvent the wheel and use something else. Like the GoCoder SDK is well tuned for Wowza's streaming engine service. So that's how we got into that. And Hugo is he's definitely full stack. He can learn like anything. And then we've got another guy on our team named Donald, and he was like hardcore Java guy who got into Node and Rethink and just Mongo and Postgres, and he's on fire. And he does stuff on the front end in React Native too. And then there's another guy on our team, Pranay, iOS guy that I told you about, who's jumped on learning Android, Java. He's learned Node. He's learned even just making like simple web pages. It was just an interest to him. We just don't. Nobody's really standoffish about learning stuff. Like it used to be, people were pretty set in their ways, I felt, but now it's sort of open where you can learn whatever you want. In fact, most of the people in our office, including artists, we actually give them a taste of working in like either React.js or React Native, but just kind of taking the time to teach them. So it's not uncommon for our project managers to have access to our GitHub repos, pull the code, make copy changes, have our artist have access to the repos, pull the code, and make CSS changes, or even just using Sketch with the React Native translations to at least get some of those styles prepped for so they can see how it's working and test it on their own end. It's all been, like I said, very helpful. And I won't say that you can necessarily do things, some people argue you can do things 2 times as fast, but I just think the idea of being able to put that many people's eyes gives you that much more polish time, because you have that many people looking at all of those details, which can sometimes really drain, someone who's been developing the project for 3 months. It can be pretty draining. So having someone to go in and make that 900th copy change on the same alert because the client keeps requesting it to be changed from a period to this word to that word, clearly there's a limitation, but it's nice to have like a project manager just pull that, knock that out, and then, call that ticket done. And then that goes off into verification. So pretty happy with it.
Yeah, it's huge to have that many people on your team kind of all on the same page. And it just makes just a huge difference. I mean, it's definitely one of the main reasons a lot of the companies that I work with end up switching when they already have native teams. They still have to learn this new framework, and a lot of times they're even learning JavaScript in the meantime, but it still ends up being an overall kind of payoff. But I guess one thing I'm kind of interested in hearing about, I know, Kevin, you mentioned that you may be doing a rewrite right now, or maybe moving away from React Native because of a certain use case. So I'll let you answer this first, but I'm also curious, Michael, have you ever had recently start a project using React Native, or maybe using Native, or maybe using Cordova, and kind of started working on it and then realized partway through that this may not be the best technology?
Yeah, so we ran into an issue where we were wanting to use a JavaScript library that's used throughout the organization. We wanted to use it in React Native. And we ran into performance issues because JavaScript core is not as performant as it should be. And ultimately what we want is our code, all of our code, to be run inside WK WebKit instead of just the normal WebKit. And so that has us thinking about, possibly going back to a React-based app and run that in Cordova. Or the other option is just to kind of continue to maintain our iOS and Android apps on their own. And then, of course, we could, use React Native and basically migrate the stuff that's over in those particular apps, move them inside those native modules inside of a React Native app. So I don't know, that's kind of what we've been exploring. Michael, what's your experience with working with that, with those kinds of challenges?
I can say that oddly enough, we haven't ran into too many of those problems. I will say that with WebRTC, I do remember there being a really big challenge where we wanted to fork in the repo and just really hunkering down on it, because there was just some stuff that was so hard to work with, and it had to do with release builds. They were using something that was causing the release builds to not properly use SSL, and that was like it was almost like the whole idea of like you depending on modules to solve your problems too much, and we wound up getting past it, but it was that one actually was causing us a bit of pain. That would have been one where it would have been negligible the amount of time, but going native at that point wouldn't have been a bad thing either, because it would have definitely rectified the problem. But I've seen it go both ways. I've seen on iOS where people have used some CocoaPods or even just some other stuff that they didn't write from scratch, because they're trying to solve a problem a little bit faster with a library, turn into a real nightmare. I would say that when we typically run into something where React Native may not make sense, again, we have all of the native bench, and those guys they're the same guys working in the React Native code. These guys will just write a module. I mean, it's unbelievable. They'll write a module, they'll expose the right APIs for the junior developers that may not know, and they'll be able to integrate it, and it works pretty seamlessly. We've got it down tight.
Yeah, no doubt. I wish we could do that. To elaborate a little bit more, our situation, the library I'm talking about is actually an internal library, and it's one that was written out of this need to kind of solve the landscape, or make the same APIs in the iOS applications, Android applications, and web applications that are being written around these EPUBs that we're dealing with. And what's interesting is that the library itself is written for the server in Scala, and using Scala.js, it is provided as made into a JavaScript library, and that's what we have from our React application in the browser to work with these EPUBs. And our hope was to be able to take that and use it on the device in React Native. And we've run into a few performance problems just because there's no JIT compiler. And so yeah, I would love to be able to drop down to something native. What we'd have to do though is we'd have to take all of that knowledge that's in Scala, and we could probably get a Java build out of it. But C++, we'd have to write something that adhered to that spec.
Yeah. And so I guess just because I'm thinking out loud here, obviously the refactor is really what you're trying to avoid, right? You're trying to be in a situation where you're trying to recycle as much of the code because it was well written for what it's for, and the compatibility React Native is turning out to be challenging on your end, and there's just no one's going to write a compiler, right, to solve their problem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what the organization went through was that they were dealing with these EPUBs, and all of these different interfaces were being written in different languages to deal with these EPUBs, and things were getting out of sync. And so to limit that interaction with an EPUB, the idea to write a library that could be used everywhere was, especially with these two technologies, Scala and Scala JS and, JavaScript, right? We can touch just about anything with that. And so we're actually, we ran into the issue with, let me say that it works, but it's not performant. So because JavaScript core is single threaded. And so, that has us thinking, what do we do? Should we go to a Cordova app? Should we, abandon this and just stick with native and just spruce those apps up? So yeah, it's an interesting problem, and yeah, we obviously don't want to write something. Now there is, all the questions of why isn't React Native, or why is it running against JavaScript core instead of being run inside WebKit essentially, or WK WebKit, which doesn't have the same limitations. So, and there have been a number of GitHub issues filed about that, questioning. And from what I can find is that the React Native team says that it using JavaScript core the way it is leads to faster load time for all of the apps. For all the React Native apps. So I'm not certain if our problem is ever going to get solved via the traditional React Native route. It seems like it's a purposeful decision that they made to use JavaScript core the way they've done it, and the only hook to get out of it is to essentially use a native module.
I think if we want to I guess if there is maybe just a single kind of statement that can be made about this whole situation, like when should you use React Native, when should you not, so on and so forth. At least recently, and I've been working especially with it seems like financial institutions, and React Native has worked really well for them because most of the time we're working with UIs that are not complex, but they need to feel native, because they're enterprise type of solutions and things like that. But just in general, the answer, in my opinion, if someone just came and asked me, I would pretty much say, for pretty much, 90% of apps that are just being built, unless you're doing, and I'm not talking about games, I'm talking about just, normal apps, like maybe dealing with photos, videos, lists, just business use cases and things like that. Unless you do have a very specific kind of use case or issue, kind of like how Kevin's working with, React Native just at this point seems to work pretty well. And, it seems to have been, making pretty much all the customers that I've been working with lately, they seem to be very happy with it. And the prices, as far as their development costs and things like that, are kind of going down as they kind of switch over to React Native versus what they were doing natively. But I mean, I don't think you would see maybe a big drop off in cost if you're moving from Cordova. But as far as the performance, of course, it's definitely there. So if someone came to me and asked me, I would probably just tell them that. I would be like, look, unless you have some very specific use case that React Native doesn't already kind of handle, and you're going to end up having to kind of either go into the native side on both Android and iOS and build some complex bridge, or you're building a game, then React Native is probably a pretty safe bet, at least right now. I mean, there's always going to be flux in this industry, and there's other projects that are going to come along, and I'm super interested to kind of see, what the next thing is, if there is a next thing. I'm actually taking a look at Weeks, just kind of to get an idea of what's going on with that project. That seems pretty interesting. But overall, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I would tell a client at this point in time.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, you did touch on some things which are, again, the specialized performance and things like that. I think we're all pretty savvy enough to pick up on those things. Like if somebody wants some really advanced AR thing, or God forbid, there really wouldn't be a compelling reason to do, a high performance 3D game inside of React Native at this point. Those sort of things are, better solved by other tools. At the end of the day, I think that what React Native does give is it gives developers something new to work with. kind of a common code language across solving for many problems, especially when you've got, a lot of different pieces of the puzzle that require like multiple clients for different things. And it's all pretty standard, but building in React Native, I think in any project, at least at this point, has really taught us to sort of hold tight, embrace the change. And like you said, be on the lookout for what's next, because I think things feel a lot more approachable than they used to feel in just the pure native realm, right? Like when someone said something new's coming, it was like, no, I just learned this.
So we're probably getting close on time. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of us to kind of talk to you about before we start wrapping it up?
I don't think so. I mean, I will just tell you this much. It's definitely an honor to be on the show, and also to, finally talk to you guys. I mean, there's a lot of respect on this side of the table. I'm telling you right now, your Medium post, just in general, the contributions, the fact that you have the show up, I couldn't be more happy. There's definitely a lot of guys on my team who, got pretty excited. I also will say that when I went to F8 and was in the React Native area, I heard you were over there, so I must have missed you. But that all the guys knew who you were on the team. The guy who wrote Jest knew you. The guy who was working on React VR knew you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and that was pretty awesome. I'm also wearing my React socks by Strideline.
Nice.
They gave out so much swag at that thing, but I will say that, like, again, I think the fact that there is a tool like this that lets us focus on a cross-platform experience that I will say isn't a pain to work with once you get up and going, and the learning curve has always been exceptional. And I think that, again, this show and a lot of your contributions, they're certainly helpful. There's a ton of people that definitely benefit from people, just as you and I got inspired from Ray Winderlich. Like, that is a great way to just dive right in and feel like you're part of the developer community. Because back when I was in school, being a developer was hard work. They didn't just accept you. They didn't teach you nothing. You're on your own.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool to hear. Thank you for the compliment. It's I think as anybody that probably does blogging and anything like this in their spare time will probably tell you it's probably because they really enjoy doing it. So it's kind of like, it's fun to do, and it's also awesome to hear that people get stuff out of it. But I feel like I watched the talk, and it was at an Angular conference, and it was in Las Vegas, and it was called Building Bridges, I think, and it was from one of the big Angular guys at the time, and it had like a really profound impact on me, and he pretty much was talking about how he kind of progressed from being someone who didn't know what he was doing at all to becoming like really well known and like being a very successful developer, but also a successful community member. And he pretty much talked about how like everything he learned was from other people, either giving them their free time or writing blog posts or creating open source or mentoring, and how we should all kind of, once we get to a point where we know what we're doing, we should all, try to do that if we can. And of course, it's not like, everybody is not privileged enough to do that, So, I mean, if you are, it's a great thing to do to kind of give back. And it's really cool to hear that you have benefited from the blog posts and stuff, because it's truly, really fun to do. And I'm sure other people that do the same thing will probably say the same thing. So.
Yep. No, I totally agree. I would say the only other one, as someone mentioned him on your show, and again, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but the Udemy courses by Steven Girder or Greider. I think it's Girder.
Yes. He has an advanced React Native course that is awesome.
Yeah. The one thing about the guy that kills me is how normalized his code ends up being. That's the part. It's like everybody in the office, like if he's just doing that freestyle, that's pretty amazing, because this stuff like needs very little refactoring, because he is really got that whole, keeping everything really, really simple, really clean, and having the responsibility lie on all of those internally nested components, passing props. Like he's just got it down. Like if his code's more than 300 lines on any component except maybe like the entry point, that I don't think you'd ever see that in his code. It's really mind numbing.
So I think we'll go ahead and jump to the picks. Kevin, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I do. I have a few picks. One is a post by Kent Dodds called How Writing Custom Babel and ESLint Plugins Can Increase Productivity and Improve User Experience. I actually read this 2 weekends ago, and it's talking about using code mods, which is a term that I'm not sure if the guys at Facebook coined it. I know there's a utility they released, but it's the idea of taking code that you've written and adapting it to newer syntax in a programmatic way. And most people are familiar with like having an ESLint plugin that can alert them if they've got a console.log in there. But you can actually take that same functionality in actually using Babel, and you can use the AST, the abstract syntax tree, and have it actually rewrite your code for you. And when I read this a couple of weekends ago, I was facing a problem in a current code base in which we want to migrate away from some code, some specific utility we're using, and you do it a different way. And I read this blog post, and then Kent has a training on front-end masters, but he also has I guess a trial run of it up on YouTube, and I'll put that link in the show notes. But I spent about 2 hours with ASTExplorer.net, which is the other, the third pick I have. All three of those are related to this, but it allows you to explore an AST in your browser with code that you cut and paste, and to run it through a Babel plugin right there in your browser, just like a JS Bin or JS Fiddle. It's probably one of the most impressive things of the past few years that's kind of come on my radar, because I'm not really afraid anymore to adapt new code syntax, even though it's not accepted into the language. So highly encourage everyone to read these posts, watch his videos, send him some love on Twitter, because I think just being aware of this, that you can adapt your code anytime you want, and you can do it programmatically. I mean, and I really mean there's tens of lines of code that I have, and we're able to rewrite and dismiss from syntax that that's just it's specific to a library we're using. We're able to migrate to something else and do it automatically. So I'll put those links in the show notes.
Michael, do you have any picks?
I do. I have 3. This AST Explorer is pretty cool, though. I've been peeping it out. One of the picks I got is there's a book. If I think it's just really helped accelerate my own learning, but it's from Manning Publishing, and it's called Functional Programming in JavaScript. It's by Louis Atencio. It's I don't know if you ever read that book, but it's a fantastic book. It's very thorough, and it was done in 2016, but it's got a lot of, I want to say, like, the original way of thinking code, and then sort of the newer stuff with like generators and maps, and then how to utilize like promises and structures. It's pretty good. The next pick I've got is if you guys use SourceTree, they have a dark theme, and it's freaking awesome, because I've been using SourceTree and it's been looking the same for quite some time, but now they have a dark theme one. So you can just, if you get the latest SourceTree, you can enable dark theme, and it looks really good, and it's great on your eyes. So when you're browsing repos, you can just, have it look a lot like your own code themes. And then my final pick is actually a pretty shameless plug. We published something called React Native Progress Display. What we did is we created a native module to wrap SV Progress HUD on iOS and K Progress HUD on Android, because we used SV Progress HUD so much and it's just really slick and it just works. So we just decided to make that a module you can install. And so it's up for available. We put it out about a month ago.
Nice. And what repo is that under?
It's React Native Progress Display is the name of it on NPM. And then if you go to GitHub, Metal Mobile Enterprises and Metal MEDL, Metal Mobile Enterprises, you can see that React Native Progress Display. It's a first run. I love the community though. It's really fun.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. I'll check that out. Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of picks. The first is a Reason React tutorial by Jared Forsyth. It's kind of a quick intro into Reason from a JavaScript or React developer's perspective. So it's pretty good for our listeners, I think. And then Jason Brown recently put out a video course on animations called Master React Native Animations. And you can go to reactnativeanimations.com and check it out. We've had Jason on our show in the past. He's just like literally the expert on React Native animations. He's done some really crazy things, and he's like probably a year ahead of his time on kind of understanding and being able to do these crazy things. And he's put out a really great course kind of talking about it. I would definitely check it out if you're kind of interested in animations. And then we are at React Native Training. We have we're doing training. So if anybody listening kind of wants an on-site instructor to come in and kind of do a 1 to 2 or 3 days, kind of giving your developers just hands-on experience, kind of building out a real-world app or anything like that, or on-site consulting, we do that. So feel free to reach out to us. You can go to reactnative.training. Also, check out our YouTube channel, React Native Training. We've been putting up a few videos. And on our blog, we're going to be having a guest post by Peggy Razis. She's going to be doing a YouTube video and a Medium blog post for us, going over how to bridge native modules into React Native. So looking forward to that. So if you're interested in that, just kind of check us out. Probably about around the time that this is released. I'm pretty sure those should be out. Okay, well, that wraps up episode 73. Michael, it's really cool to finally meet you, and I definitely look forward to staying in touch. And thank you for taking time out of your schedule to kind of join us on the podcast today.
No, pleasure's all mine. And, you know, if either of you guys are down in the Orange County area and you've gotten your fill of Newport Beach and all of the fine living down there, you can feel free to swing by the shop, pull up a chair. You know, if you need to get some work done, hang out with us. We're definitely open door. We'd love to have you guys just come down and say hi if you're ever in the area.
I can't think of a much better like life than living in Orange County and writing code. It sounds pretty awesome because I lived in Huntington Beach and I was still like a junior at the time. But if I was kind of where I'm in my career now and I was living down there, I don't think I would leave.
It's pretty hard to leave. All my parents back home were like, "Oh, you've abandoned us." But I'm like, I invite them down here. And then their whole perspective changes. They're like, when I retire, I'm moving into your house. And I'm like, great.
Totally. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and we'll see everyone next week.